Hi, I'm Brenda Reese, freedom and forgiveness coach, and a person just like you that is learning to navigate life and all of its challenges. I teach a forgiveness process like no other. It's a blend of practical and spiritual forgiveness. This process guides you into knowing how unforgiveness can be keeping you stuck in your relationships, both personally and professionally, and how it prevents you from releasing resentment and finding joy. Each week, I share practical and some not so practical tips, tools, and advice from myself and other people that are on this journey just like us. This is for you if you are ready to turn your pain into peace. Welcome to the Forgive Yourself podcast. So welcome to the Forgive Yourself podcast with Brenda Reese. I am so excited today because I have a great guest with us that I think you're going to just enjoy. Betsy Jordyn is a brand positioning strategist that helps consulting and coaching business owners clarify their brand positioning and messaging, create a website presence that positions them as sought after experts, land clients with ease and integrity. Doesn't that sound great? And take their place as thought leaders and influencers in their niche. Her mission is to help consultants and coaches monetize their best at strengths and authentic passions to make a bigger difference in the world. Welcome, Betsy, to the Forgive Yourself podcast.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on the show.
I'm so excited that we actually get to do this because I got to be on your podcast, which you have a fabulous podcast. And so we'll put all of that in the show notes too of how people can contact you. But I was reflecting as we were talking about getting together here and chatting about forgiveness in our lives and how we met years ago through the Thought Leadership Academy, right? With Carol Cox.
I can't believe that was years ago. Like that just seems like yesterday. I'm getting ready to launch like my 100th podcast episode, like in a couple of weeks.
Congratulations.
Which is what both of us have our podcast that came out of that Thought Leader Academy. So it's crazy. It just seems like time just flew.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Congratulations. That's a big deal.
Thank you.
Yes. And I love your guests and I love what you share on that podcast. Everybody check this out because especially if you're an entrepreneur or starting a business, you give so much information and you've got so many resources. So yes, thank you for all that you're sharing with everyone. I appreciate that. Yes. And we were talking before we started about conversations that we've had, different experiences with forgiveness, and especially in a group of entrepreneurial women where we can share the different kinds of things. And on this podcast, I like to share about forgiveness and how it affects us in all of our lives, every part of our life. And for me, that forgiveness isn't just about apologizing, right? It's about how we can learn to know ourselves better so that we can discover what our blocks are that keep us from what you're doing, shining the light in the world, from being out there and getting our messages clearly so people can find us and that, we can find them. And so we were talking about the different types of the things that entrepreneurs face.
Mm-hmm.
And what do you think?
I think what's interesting, so in my role as a business mentor, so I help consultants and coaches, particularly because my audience are really like these high achiever people who kind of hit the top of their profession and they leave and they start their business. Yeah. And what I think is interesting in my work, because I deal a lot of the fears and a lot of the issues that people have. And I think a lot of it comes from like unresolved issues of like what got you into entrepreneurship. That I love to say that everybody gets to entrepreneurship because they have some sort of great vision for their career, but usually something difficult pushes them out of the nest. Like there's like a job redefinition that's just super insulting, or they get fired or they hit burnout. So then they have like all this unprocessed shame over what got them to this place. And then that kind of turns that I think that stuckness turns into like all of that other stuff, the money fears, the imposter syndrome, and all that other stuff. And I think when it comes to forgiveness, I think that that's an end of a process. I think a lot of times people think about forgiveness is like, okay, well, I got to forgive. And that to me is just a form of denial and repression. I think the way you talk about forgiveness is like, that's the culmination, the final step of the acceptance. And I think that that's where the misunderstanding is around forgiveness is like, I should just white knuckle it. Positive psychology, you see so much on the social media about like positive, our brains are like Velcro for negative thoughts and it's Teflon for positive. So you can change your life by just setting your mind on the positive things. But then you have all this like grief, like these betrayals are real. It's significant. There's 1,000 ways in the workplace we get betrayed. Layoffs is the obvious most significant one. After X number of years in a career, I'm just unceremoniously like just left out. Giving up all of these vacations and all this other stuff. Like that's a bitter, awful betrayal. But to put that positive spin on it right away, like that's just completely disregarding the extent of like that attachment that you might have had to the organization or what you did. So to me, there's a couple different issues with workplace betrayal versus romantic or other kind of betrayals. In workplace, it's like it just immediately goes into shame. You see meme after meme that shoves it even more. And then forgiveness just feels like a manipulative tool versus what you talk about as it relates to what forgiveness actually is. And I think that that's what you're trying to do is you're on this like mission to create that polemic between like this false, just get over it, just look positive.
Ugh, that makes me nauseous. To think that way, but you are so correct because it's so true. And that was my experience, in corporate. That was my experience was burnout, basically. And, with a boss that I could never do anything right for. And the way that I found that out, and then, having coworkers, I was an executive assistant to a vice president of a very large company and I couldn't do anything right. Well, I had the credentials to get there. But, when you're trying so hard, it was shame. It was always like, how did I even get this job? Maybe I'm not good enough. All of that came up for the first really time in my life in the work environment.
Yeah.
To the point where it affects you physically. And you're right, as far as I agree with you in that toxic positivity. And people are just like, well, just go get another job and you're going to be fine. And, I had adrenal fatigue and needed surgery because my
Yeah.
body, the stress of it that caused it to break down. And the other piece, when you said betrayal, it took me a while. It took me about 18 months to what I call detox from that job because it was my part of my life.
Mm-hmm.
So when people get laid off like that, I totally get it. I made a choice to step away. And that was hard, because of everything involved in that, the emotions and the abilities. And then I was trying to do the same thing. It's like, okay, think positive. And it's like, I couldn't. There was so much grief.
Well, and the thing that you just said is, I chose to step away. It's like, well, you chose to step away after it got so intolerable. You had no
Thank you.
choice but to step away. And that's where it's like sometimes we misunderstand. Like, I think that this whole idea of employee engagement is unethical. I have an article actually on my website. Employee engagement's unethical because it's manipulative. Because
Mm-hmm.
organizations don't have a limbic brain. So here's, let me back up. So a lot of people want to say about employee engagement is you want to win the hearts and minds of their employees so that they can work harder, stay longer, and all those other things. So they're building this like one-sided contract where it's like, I want your heart and mind, but I'm an organization that has no limbic brain and I have no ability to attach to you. There's this weird power differential, but I want all of this. So somebody like believes this false, narrative is we really care about our employees and their hearts and minds and we want to win them over. Oh, but look, COVID happened. We're having a little bit of dip, half of you or more. We're going to send, either we're sending you home or we're firing you. But then when business comes back or when we get past the pandemic, they're all of a sudden like now there's people who are gotten used to working at home and they're saying, you've got to come back into the office. And it's like, okay, well, it's a one-sided contract. We need you to flex and go home. We need you to manage everything the way it is. But then when we want you to come back because it seems to support whatever it is that we're doing at this moment, sorry, that was a joke. We don't really mean that, and then you come back. And I think there's so much dysfunction. And what your listeners may not know is I came to be a brand positioning strategist after 30 years of experience as an organization development consultant. So I have been in these executive meetings. I know how they think about different things. And one of the reasons why I pivoted my business is just sheer mental and emotional exhaustion from watching these short-term profitability decisions that were made at the expense of employees. I had one of my clients that was the worst client ever. And there were suicides in the workplace because their leadership and operating practices were that bad. And I remember like being beside myself. Like when I was facilitating focus groups, it was like more like grief groups. And then I go to my global community of consultants that I was a part of, and they're like, why are you so upset about this? Because the leadership team literally didn't care. And eventually at the end of my project, because I was hired by the holding company, the entire executive team of this organization got fired. I was devastated. But in this global community of consultants, they're like, why do you care? You got your paycheck. I'm like, oh my gosh, like I want to die. Like, this is why I got on a mission. I'm like, I want to help like purpose-driven consultants and coaches win against these people. Like, I think that was like the impetus that even got me to start this business, because there's like this betrayal. You just see it over and over again. And I think when it comes to forgiveness work and what you're doing this is one of those sneaky areas that we really don't pay attention to. We don't see the impact of toxic environments on us.
No, that was powerful. And thank you for sharing that, especially your story, about how you got to this. This is powerful. And I think that story that you're talking about, and you probably have more statistics than I do about that, but I think that's more common to have those kind of work environments than it is to have somebody who's really happy to go to work.
Mm-hmm.
And that betrayal, like I found in working with people, especially people coming out of corporate or coming out of jobs, is a fact of this pattern of betrayal is also something that's been with them in their lives.
Yeah.
It goes back seriously to childhood. And that's what we discover in the forgiveness work. And it's not like therapy in the sense of we're going to sit there and you're going to, we're going to dive back into the pain. But it's like you and I've talked about, where, we just kind of connect the dots and we make a connection between, what is happening now with where else has this happened in my life? For me, it went all the way back to the dad, right?
Right.
To the dad leaving. And that was really powerful for me to realize that all the husbands that I had, the bosses that I had, there was something familiar about that. And it's like, oh, that's where it goes.
Right.
And then to be able to do the process around it and not dive into the pain exactly, but do a process around it, which we've talked about. And I mean, it was powerful. It helped me. It took a little while to unwind, but it helped me in that letting go process and being able to claim myself to be able to, like, you're right. There was a catalyst that got me into entrepreneurship because I had no plans of, I was going to be in corporate forever.
Yeah.
That was my mindset. That was my box, but it was just not positive at all. It wasn't a real healthy environment. And I'm sure you see that with a lot of your clients. Is that true?
I would say it's 100% of my clients in some ways. Like I might have some people, like I think it's interesting is I have some people who are like a couple years out. They're like, I just want to do this smart and, and I want to start my business. But then something happens that where it's like, oh, I got a promotion or whatever that initial like thing, then they never launch, like then they just kind of like, go back there. What really gets people to move. So at least for me in my world, like I think there's a difference between a entrepreneurship as a first career versus entrepreneurship as a second career. If it's a first career, no, you can get into it because you just chose it. You maybe got a degree in entrepreneurship. You're in your 20s, 30s, you start your first job is a business. You don't have that same type of thing of like, okay, I've built a certain identity that's attached to this organization. I've built a certain kind of expertise. Now I want to move. That's on a different level of like transformation, that is in every aspect. And so nobody makes that big of a transformation without something happening. It never happens. It's like vision enough because you have to enter into the unknown. You have to deal with so many other things where you have to be in this like weird in between place. And so nobody makes that kind of move without some sort of catalyst. So I would say the most common reasons why people leave is something that happened to their job loss, job redefinition, which makes it seem like job loss is on the horizon. So I almost would put like job redefinition or job loss. They're all part of the same thing because one is like an immediate job loss and one is the writing's on the wall, job loss. The second is because of burnout, as you were mentioning. Burnout is such a huge issue. And then third is a category around, I would just kind of call it like the existential crises. Something happens, divorce, death in the family, something that makes it seem like, why am I giving up? All of these hours, all of these hours, these vacations, all of my emotional energy to somebody else's bottom line. And for what? you know like there's only so much life to live. I got to do something different, so that gets a fire underneath it. But all three of those circumstances all create shame, because you're looking at everybody else around you and it's like, well, what's wrong with me? Why am I bothered by these things? I remember like walking around these organizations, and it's like, that's how I got into OD in the first place. Is the organization would say one thing and then they would do something else, and the discrepancy drove me crazy. I'm like, well, I got to fix this, like that's probably something with my childhood as well. Somewhere in there, you're going to psychoanalyze me. But,
Well, yeah.
but I think as much as we say people change from pain, vision, or consequences, I don't think vision is alone. And that's what gets us to move. Then we have shame. Then we don't process it. Now we're trying to start our business and put our space out there where we got all these other noisy things going on in the background. And I think that's the big discrepancy between a high achieving, ambitious, heart centered person who wants to make a difference. What gets them there, or what propels them, is usually this other thing. And now it's like, how do I keep my public face while I got like this crap show going on, inside or in my personal life? How do I balance these two things?
Oh my gosh, you are so good. And I love this as far as this direction. Thank you for sharing that. I love how you are so articulate, and you're just so
Oh,
brilliant
thank you.
with what you do and passionate. So I get that. And I understand now, why even better after knowing you for a little bit is like just watching you, just explain this. It's like, it's so beautiful. And that about the high achieving, you have the high achieving person here that has the, kind of the shit show going on inside. Right. And having that conversation that we had about it separately is really brilliant. And I think we need to talk about that more,
Mm-hmm.
about how, as especially high achieving women, about we carry all that shame and
Yeah.
it is unprocessed. And do you find that with some of your clients? Have you had this experience where you've had that? And do you feel that that is something that needs to be addressed first before they can like work on the branding, work on the strategy piece of it? Is that what part of what you help people with? Is
I would.
identifying it or working through it?
I'm a big believer in we grow through like more action learning than theoretical learning. Like,
Okay.
so I can talk theoretically about like forgiveness. I can read a book about forgiveness, but what do I do with a specific situation? Like, so let's say I'm in a business relationship with somebody or a personal relationship and they betray me. That's when I can actually work it through. So the way I set up my branding process is I put things into like these bite-sized chunks. Like I take the creative process of branding and I put it in a step-by-step way. And while we're dealing with each step, then we're going to uncover like what are the barriers. If they're, like a lot of times, like my clients have a meltdown when it comes to like, I tell them every time, like there's going to be an oh shit moment at one point or another in the process. I'm your mentor, but part of the word mentor is tormentor, because I'm going to remember what you tell me that's important to you. And then I'm going to go on the wrestling mat with that part of you that's going to resist it at some certain point. So it's whether you're choosing your niche and your ideal client, that's one place where people lose their minds. Another is like when they have to like get photos and put their pictures on their website, or when they actually hit publish and launch, like, or maybe when they're landing the first client and they have to price themselves. It's going to happen at some point. But when you're having the meltdown, that's when you can start getting curious. Like, what's the story behind this meltdown? What's coming up for me? But I do feel like it's important that there is an explicit conversation around normalizing that no one, and this is the worst part of social media, and what we perceive is like influencers and people taking pictures all the time. Like they all look like everybody's got their life together.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, what's wrong with me? And so that's where everything goes into the background. Like it goes underneath, and then you keep repeating these patterns. Like for me, my bigger story is like, like this ridiculous, my one of my superpowers is my idealism. One of my biggest number one Achilles heel is my idealism. I believe I trust first and then prove to me later. And I cannot tell you how many times I have developed
Oh,
business partnerships with people based on like idealism. Like I had one partner who said like, okay, we're going to work together and we're going to create this like content, and she's like, you create all the content because everyone loves my content creation skills. You create all the content, but I'm super good at selling and I'll sell it. So we spent a year working on this whole like talent stuff. And then we get to the end of the year. She's like, I changed my mind. I don't want to do this. I want to go in a different direction. But because I bounced ideas off of her to get her buy-in, she took co-ownership over my content and then repackaged it, made her own book.
oh my
She pretty
goodness.
much stole my intellectual property for a year. I had another guy who said, like, oh, you're really good at landing work and I really want to deliver stuff. So let's like do something together. Show me how you do it. And then he wound up like for a second contract with a client, like kind of going behind the scenes and developing a relationship separately with a client. And this happens over and over again. And it's my idealism. Like, why did I not set up like clear agreements on the front end in writing? That we both sign, like I could tell you, recent partnerships did the same thing, and I started even commingling some money and stuff like that. I'm like, oh my gosh, what's wrong with me? That's where the work is. It's not what's
Yes.
wrong with me. It's just like what's not healed to figure out why would I not take these steps. And I think the same thing goes back to organizations. Like I believe like the new model of employee engagement, this is just little Betsy theories. It really needs to be employees look at themselves as like little business owners within the company. They're external working for a company. They have their own boundaries. Like, this is how much, this is my work. This is the value around the work. I'm going to go above and beyond because it builds my track record. It builds my social proof. It builds what my skill set so that I could take this anywhere. But just don't overly invest in something that does not have the ability to love you back. It doesn't. And no matter what you do, like as a consultant for 30 years, I'm like, there's literally nothing I can do to fix a toxic organization. There's only one way that you could fix a toxic culture. My one solution, it is the only one that will permanently and truly change the culture and change that organization. And do you know that one thing?
Top down.
Swap out that top leader.
Yep.
Swap them out. That is the only thing. He needs to swap him out or her, swap them out. That is the only way to fix it. You will not fix it
Oh my
from
gosh.
underneath. You're not going to change their mind. Somebody doesn't want to change it. It's just never going to happen. So give up on this idealism. You can't coach somebody to ethics. You can't coach somebody to care about how the employees feel or how customers feel or how the planet is impacted by your business practices. If they are motivated, and this is the problem that a lot of times of how the C-suite is hired is they're hired for these short-term results because the shareholders want this return. They don't care.
Right.
They don't care. They literally don't care. And this is where every time when I work with my clients, I'm sorry, I'm on my little soapbox. Every time I work with my clients who are going into organizations,
Yeah.
and they're like, oh, I'm afraid to go into corporate again because I got burnt out. I'm like, yeah, but this time you're going in with boundaries. You have to care, but just not that much.
Yes.
And you have to choose where you care. You're not going to fix the system, but can you help provide that one moment of support for that one leader who is just beside themselves and give them some sense of empowerment? Like that's where your wins are. Don't fix the culture. You're not going to.
No, thank you. Thank you for saying that. This is awesome. Oh my God, I love this, Betsy. I love this. And I know there's people out there, listeners, don't you love this? I mean, this is amazing because it is true. When you don't have the empathy, right, as leaders, it doesn't trickle down. I mean, I've got several colleagues that go in and mentor the C-suite. There's actually corporation, not the huge ones, but the middle ones where they're going in and because they want to know how can I engage better to really bring in the people and the culture to make it better.
Mm-hmm.
And, but not a lot of them are doing that, but there are some that are doing it. And I love how you said this, because this is relationship talk. Go into it with boundaries.
Yes.
That's universal. with anything. And how many out there? I mean, raise your hands. How many know how to do this? No,
Oh,
not
no.
no,
Wait,
don't. No, not. I
I'm
know.
gonna sit on my hands.
How many don't know how to do this?
Oh,
Right? How
don't. Woo,
many?
woo,
Yeah,
woo.
exactly.
Learning. I'm
Learning. We're learning,
a
and I
growing boundary
learned.
person.
Well, I'm like you. I was very trusting. So trusting at first. And then I discovered why. And doing the forgiveness work, it was like, oh, that goes back to growing up. It goes back to the family of origin. It goes back to trying to find my place in the world. It goes back to proving myself, and that I'm going to trust you first to get that love that I needed, or appreciation or acknowledgement, however we want to word it, first, and from somebody else outside of ourselves. And that's just not where we're going to get it.
And I think there's another thing with boundaries that you made me think about is a therapist a long time ago used to say that I was like an 80-20 person, where it's like I'll do 80% of the work and accept like 20% of the return. And I'm like, well, then I started processing. I'm like, okay, I think I'm more of a 90-10. But think about it this way. If you're going to choose, because there's part of me that feels like, agape love, or you really care about somebody, it's like it's 100-100. Like, but you really can't do 100-100 because you're doing 100, that other person's doing 100. There really is nothing wrong with 50-50. And this is why it's so important. Like, if you're a business owner, like, you have to charge your worth, because
Right.
otherwise, you're being a codependent person. Like, I just landed a client who is a consultant to the nonprofit sector. I don't mind giving a discount to somebody who is going after a sector that really is not going to pay the same level. And, like, there is something about that. But I made a strategic, empowering choice. Like, this is what I want to do. But what if I discounted my worth because it's like, well, I really want the work? Or what if I just keep doing more and more for them, unpaid work, without looking at it? It's not to say that you can't do things, but you have to make sure you have the energy exchange. And similar
Yes.
for companies, like if you're an employee and you're going in, some of it that's on you. We allow other people to mistreat us because we don't even know. And I think, like, to me, like, there's a forgiveness work, there is some degree of a self-forgiveness work, but now let me get clear on what it is where were the permeable boundaries, the permeable
Yeah.
membranes, as Elizabeth Gilbert says, that allowed this toxicity in there. And at what point do I say, like, in this bubble, I will be treated with respect and consideration. And if respect is not served, this organization's toxic. How am I going to deal with my scarcity fears and just get the heck out?
Well, absolutely. It's self-acknowledgement, self-awareness, and then self-forgiveness, right? Because of the fact of just understanding that it's not us in the beginning, it's the culture. But why am I drawn to that culture?
And why do
It's
I
kind of
think I
like,
could fix it? How arrogant am
right.
I?
Well, but why are we drawn to certain relationships? You and I can
Yeah.
relate to having interesting relationships
Yep,
throughout
me
our
too.
life.
Yeah. Well, I would love to say all of these challenges I just reserve for the workplace, but in my personal life, I got it all figured out. I
Yeah,
wish. I
I
wish.
know. I know. I wish too. I wish it was true that we could actually compartmentalize, but we can't.
Yeah.
We
No.
can't really, what happens in a personal life does bleed over into the work environment, whether entrepreneurial, corporate, or whatever, and vice versa. It does, because that's that conversation that I would love to have do a whole episode on, which we will, you and I, as far as, that, like we talked about, the high achieving women that have stuff going on that's affecting them from actually growing and doing the work that they're meant to do, because it does affect us. There's so many things in our personal life that does affect us.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a reason for it. And
Mm-hmm.
once we can acknowledge that reason, and once we can figure that out, it changes everything, because how we show up in the workplace, if we're looking at, because what we found in the forgiveness work is that any environment that you're in is really kind of representative of the family of origin.
Yeah.
You're going to find that you're triggered by certain people, but who did they remind you of?
It's so interesting. One of the exercises I have my clients do is this listen to your life exercise, where they go inventory, whatever their family of origin story is. Because I believe, like, passion, like what we're passionate about isn't what we love, but what's what we hate. It's what we want to fix. And I find it interesting where I hear hear different stories. Like, so one time I was like mentoring two brothers at the same time on their businesses. And so I heard about their story about their dad, at the same time, but I heard it from different angles. So one of the guys was a creative, and his dad really just squelched his creativity and did not, engage his heart. He was a real sensitive kid. So he grows up and he wants to create like workplace videos that gets the leaders to more emotionally engage with their audience. I mean, with their employees. And it's
Yeah.
like, and all he wants is these executives to, affirm the employees and connect with them. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. You're trying to fix this. But then the other one was really bothered by his father. His father was a small business owner, an entrepreneur, and he really struggled, and he wasn't very, he was a horrible business owner. So there's a lot of financial stuff. And so he has a whole business where he wants to help like these on, these small startup, small businesses, with the financial side. I'm like, oh, so both brothers are trying to save the dad. It's
Yes.
like that saving Mr. Banks, Mary Poppins was in that the whole, what's her name? The one who wrote P.L. Travers. What's that her name? Travers. I forgot the
Yeah.
name of her.
Yeah.
The movie shows like all she was wanted to do was save her dad.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's what we're trying to do. Like, now I realize, like, when I lost my love for consulting was around the same time my dad died. And it was like, well, I think I really wanted executives to nut up and do the right things for their employees. But then when my dad died, I'm like, well, that mission sort of died with him because I can't save my dad. And it drives a lot of our passions on a very subconscious level.
It sure does. And that's huge awareness. And once we become aware of that, I mean, that's I always preach about is the awareness is key. Once we can identify that, now I can do something with it, right? And then you can really ignite the love for your passion, bring it in a different way. So I'm not fixing anymore and I'm not saving, but I'm actually doing something that I love to do to bring people together as a community, right? It's more
Yeah.
heart versus
Or
having.
you shift it from the person in that, like the aggressor in the scenario, and you go towards the younger version of you. And now you're helping them and you heal yourself,
Yes.
by, helping others who've been wounded in the same way. But the beginning part is accepting I've been wounded in a particular way. And
Absolutely.
that's the first part. And that's what the world tells us we're not. So the forgiveness work that you do, it's almost like I wish there could be a different name for what you do, because the forgiveness word is, is used as toxic positivity versus what you describe it to be.
Absolutely. And I'm working on that. You and
Like,
I will talk. We're going to work on that together.
yes, we'll make up a new word,
We will. We
Maybe it's
definitely will.
forgets. Like we'll take forgiveness and acceptance and put it together, or
Yeah. I love it. We're going to find us and give it a new definition too, because I'm all about a new definition for forgiveness because we need that. It's just too scary or it's just too big, overwhelming for what it is now. And it doesn't have to be. It really doesn't have to be because when we can get curious, like you said earlier, when we can get curious about it, it brings in a whole different energy to how we're looking at our life, ourselves, our relationships, and the work environment. And we're more apt to not stay in these places,
Mhm.
right? Because we don't need to anymore, because we don't need to feed that.
And I think what's interesting too, if you like related to work, one of the things you said is like like this bleeds into this. Like, what
Yeah.
happens here, you're going to show up there. But the other side of it is also true is what you heal here gets healed there. So part of the
Mhm.
reason why I'm really a big stickler with my clients around like, what is the business that's meant for you rather than you think is the should to, ought to, is do you want to have a business that aligns with like your ego and your personality, or the one that aligns with your soul? If you can find a
Mm.
way to connect with your soul and activate it and put the messages out there and really own your worth, and then you start demanding like that equity in terms of like how you how you want to be paid, and you really own yourself as a premium brand, and you push yourself outside your comfort zone, face your fears, that's going to bleed over in your personal life. And then when you deal with stuff in your personal life, it will bleed over into your career. So that's why I'm more about an action learning type of approach. Is this stuff is hard to deal with in a vacuum. Like, so if
Yes.
you're a mid-career person, the other thing too, and I know I keep getting on my soapbox. I'm sorry. The other thing too is, there's the surface stuff of what's happening. And then there's the reality is like, there's a heroic journey for all of us. So these are all like these gifts from the universe. It's not done to you, it's done for you.
Yes.
And you have to like drop a little bit more to say, all right, my soul is trying to be activated. There's parts of me that have been exiled. All of these catalysts that I feel shame about are gifts that are
Yes.
designed for this. And so when you can go into any of the work, and that's why I think like when people hit mid-career, they go into like three different directions. They have this existential thing that's coming up at mid-career. Who am I? What difference have I made? What difference will I make? Okay, so now they're going to start studying, Alan Watts, and they're going to start going to meditation, learn mindfulness, maybe go back to church. If they have them in church, they'll go on some sort of spiritual journey. And
Right.
that's over here. Then they go and they talk to a business coach of some kind, and then like, let's go work on the business and let's figure this out. And then you have like then they do the third thing where they're going to a coach or a counselor, a therapist, and they're dealing with their emotional work
Right.
underneath it. And they're three separate threads.
Right.
And then they're using an approach that's as disintegrated as they were feeling. So the spiritual side of them is not talking to the entrepreneurial side, which is not talking to the personal side. And now they're in this silo,
Yes.
and the idea is to bring it all together, and I think that's where sometimes like when we're talking about some of the stuff of your messaging, that I think it'd be interesting that I would love to see, I would sign up instantly is, like let's talk about forgiveness in the context of a specific situation. So
Right.
let's say we followed up on your amazing podcast, which I listened to a couple days ago on estrangement and family estrangement. Absolutely brilliant, super timely. Sign me up. I'm signing up tomorrow for that. But if we can go through the process with you in this context, not only will we be able to contextualize the pain of family engagement, we will have now a muscle memory around how do I
Mhm.
work through something so if something else comes up that's outside of that, now I could do that over there.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And yes, we are working on that.
Should
And
we put a plug and say, please, anyone who's going through this specific topic, do you want to be in a new cohort on it? Because
yes,
we could try
yeah,
that
yeah.
out.
Yeah, because we're talking about doing that because of that, because the estrangement is a trend right now. And so I'm going to be talking more about that. And I've got people responding to that podcast. And just like you and I had a deep conversation around it, and estrangement is happening everywhere. And so, yeah, so if people are interested in, I encourage you to reach out and send me an email and let me know you'd be interested, because creating more groups around that or cohorts around that would be really good. So that way we know, one, we're not alone,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because so many people feel that they are alone as they go through this because the shame keeps them that way.
Yep.
Shame is isolating. And then the guilt and the things that we have, not only as parents, but there's also people with colleagues or friends that are doing the same thing. So yeah, please reach out. And thanks for bringing that up, Betsy. And I think everyone, we just got like a little TED talk as far as really, Betsy did an awesome job. Thank you so much, Betsy, for sharing so passionately about the workplace and about toxic positivity and about how we are in midlife like that. Like there's these ways that we go, and let's bring them all together. And most of all, thank you for sharing parts of your story, because I think that's what is so valuable and so needed, that vulnerability of us to be able to go, we're real. We can look like we have it all together, but we really don't. And it's those people that we really want to help go, this is okay. It's okay to not have our stuff all together as long as we're doing action around it.
And I do want to can I put a plug for you in here too?
Thank you.
Okay. So I was in the middle of a business crisis. So we had met as part of this thought leader academy that Carol Cox put out. And then we were part of a smaller mastermind
Mhm.
group that came out afterwards. And I had a business crisis that come up. And I was in this like, oh my God, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? What am I going to do? And I was in this like, I just got like my natural tendency, I think as a lot of high achieving women is like, I just got to get busy. I got to solve this problem. I got to do, I got to do, I got to do. And you were on the call and you were like, hold on, hold on. We need to dial in, and there was something about like, there was the way that you showed up, and it's like, you helped me connect in with like, what were the emotions that I felt about this betrayal? Like, how was I feeling about this whole scenario? And like my whole approach to that whole thing changed completely, where I I gave myself permission, like I did a little triage stuff, but I gave myself permission to say, I don't have to figure everything out tomorrow. I gave myself some time to kind of like rethink, a lot of what my business is all about, what my superpowers are. And because I kind of slowed down, like I really tapped in, like my superpowers really were on the messaging, helping people like articulate things and putting words together and getting that clarity and the positioning and the persuasive communication. Before I was kind of like all over the map because I was like including somebody else in my business and my brand. And, and I kind of like lost sight of like some of my voice. But if it wasn't for you tapping into that whole process and helping me clarify, like, I need to kind of like let this energy, and I think you said this before, like scientifically, our emotions are supposed to move through us.
Right.
And because I was in that shame spiral, and that money fear and all of that stuff, I wasn't allowing it. And because you kind of stopped me, like I learned to give myself the grace to let the emotions go through. So as a coach, sometimes I think, and I'll just say as a forgiveness coach, you all might think like it's just sort of like a squishy value proposition, but it's like, it's really not. It's the skills to reduce that cycle time from crisis to forgiveness, but not in forgiveness in the toxic positivity way of just like, okay, it was meant, it was done to me, but it was for me ultimately, move me positively. And I cannot recommend you enough. So
Oh,
anyway, so you can make that a testimonial.
I'm going to.
You
Thank
made a
you.
huge difference for me.
I know. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much, Betsy. I mean, and because it's so important. And it was funny because I remember that. And as we were talking, it was just like, I just had to. It's like, whoa, stop, Betsy. No, there's so much more to you. Stop. And it was just beautiful to watch that happen. And I love what you're doing today. And so because you tapping into those superpowers is just helping so many other people. And which leads me to, how can people get a hold of you? How can people get more information about you? Because I know you've got resources and all that, if they want to know more about what you do and who you are.
So you can find me on my website at www.betsykjordyn.com, and Jordan's with a Y, not an A. There's another Betsy Jordyn out there who gets all my emails, is with a Y. I have a couple quizzes on my website that relate to, if you want to discover your superpowers, or if you want a custom library that helps you deal with the emotions and the tactics that relate to different stages of business growth, you can do that. Or if you want to know more about my Disney best practices, you could do that. But my favorite passion project like yours is my podcast. So it's called the Enough Already podcast. It's a joy, because you get to connect in. Like, you were an amazing guest on my show. I got so many comments afterwards, like, oh my gosh, you just totally made a huge difference.
Good.
So you can check out my podcast. It's Enough Already. You can find it on my website or, wherever you listen. And that's my passion project. That's so fun. And I love the interviews. I appreciate you saying that about the guests. The reason why I love the guests are good because their guests are fascinating. It's not me. It's just like, I just sit there and I'm like, you're fascinating.
I know. Exactly. And you have awesome guests. I just love listening in, and I've learned so much just listening in. So, and thank you for being a wonderful guest. And everybody, please go check out Betsy Jordyn. And Betsy, we're going to have you back because we have more to talk about.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did enjoy it, would you do me a favor and share this episode, and then follow us on your favorite podcast app so you don't miss one episode of the Forgive Yourself podcast, where every Friday you will get tips, tools, and stories so that you can turn your pain into peace. Take care.